Morning, guys. We're having a chat this morning with Justin Fuchs. He's the product development manager from Canon South Africa. And we're quite excited to talk about the new RF 600mm f11 lens. A lot of people are skeptical about the lens. It's f11, but as soon as you look at the physics behind the lens and the quality that it delivers, along with the qualities that the R series delivers, it's an amazing setup. And Justin, please introduce us to this wonderful product.
Thank you, Gunther. Yeah, it's one of these products that came along that we didn't expect initially, and the first time Roger and I got a look at one was in February this year. And I must say, being quite brutally honest, I was a bit skeptical. And as soon as the words F11 were mentioned and I started looking at the lens, I was a bit yeah, said the least. I wasn't overly impressed. And the weird thing is, for all the years that I've been involved in the photographic industry, from being a student, studying at Technicon and all that, if you look back, and there's quite a bit of history in terms of how the lens came about. It's not the first R lens of this design. There were lenses similar to this back in the 60s. If you go back into the Canon history, you can look and see that before EOS, there was obviously the FD mount, and there was the FL, and there was actually an R mount back in the 60s. And the actual look and design of the lens itself, the physical shape of how the lens is set up, and it's quite strange that they've reintroduced a similar design, but obviously using newer technology. And we've all well familiar or aware of what Canon developed during the EF range with the DO lenses. So when they brought out the 400 DO, which was a lot more compact, a lot more light, there was technology in there that they've now obviously advanced a bit further, and that's now been incorporated. But the F11 part, that was a big concern for myself and Roger. We had lots of discussions about it. He got his production samples way before I got my samples, and he started showing me results quite a while ago, prior to July. It was April, May, June. And the first thing that occurred to me was that F11 didn't seem to be a problem in terms of background and foreground softening, so your bokeh of the lens itself. And automatically you assume that because it's F11, you're going to have tons of depth of field, you're going to have your subject sharp, and everything behind and everything in front of the lens is going to be sharp as well. And it turns out it's not the case. So we've obviously handed the lens out, and it's been used by a lot of people so far in terms of reviews, and especially in the birding community. So it came along, and I started, when I got my samples, obviously I got an 800 and a 600. The first thing I went for was I grabbed the 800, ran around. And let me just state up front that I'm no bird photographer. Most of my photography happens on a sports field using a 400 2.8. And we shoot those lenses at either 2.8 or f3.2 because we want the depth of field, and we shoot in low light conditions. So having one of these things in my midst for the first time back in July, I was a bit skeptical. So I grabbed the camera, put it onto an EOS R, and ran around in the garden. I'm fortunate I've got quite a prolific bird life where I live in Durban. And we're next to a nature reserve, so we've got all these different types of birds. And I started photographing weavers and barbets and all the different types of birds flying around. And it actually blew my mind, because it's such a simple design in terms of it's F11, it's a fixed telephoto, so it's a prime. It only has one moving part, and that's the autofocus element itself. So the construction, the construction is solid, but the first thing that you become aware of as you pick it up is the actual weight of the lens. It's not a big, chunky, heavy 600 f4, which comes with 4 kgs of mass behind it. And it's phenomenal that in its compact form, and its folded down or travel version, it's that small. But obviously you extend it, and that creates the focal length that you need. It's using DO technology somewhere. There's a bit of black magic going on here. It's quite strange that you can get 600 in that focal, in that physical size of lens. And yeah, I went out and started photographing some birds, started getting some results. So what I'm going to quickly do is I'm going to quickly click on an example. I just want to go into screen share here, and there you got it. Okay, so I ended up doing stuff with the lens that I would never normally try. So not being a bird photographer, and obviously we've got the autofocus points selected, so you can see the red square of where the focus is. So the first thing that becomes apparent, that's obviously a weaver's nest hanging on a reed. But if you look at the background, the bokeh of the lens itself, and obviously this is the items in the background are they're not close by, but we're talking at least 7 to 8 meters behind it, another range of bushes on the other side of the river. So the detail in the actual main subject is quite phenomenal. And if we click on that, we should see it come through onto you've got a full res version now on your screen.
Oh, wow, yes.
Okay, so we're looking at a subject matter that's probably in the 8 to 9 meters distance from the actual camera itself. So, and we're looking at very small, fine detail. We can see fine fibrous hairs on the reeds itself that the weavers have built the nest out of. And this was the first thing that struck me was, how can such a lens at that price point in such a simple design be so sharp? I mean, in terms of if you look at the numbers in the corner, it's f11 800th of a second at 1250 ISO, and it's midday. So this was shot back in August at 11:45 in the day. But the actual detail that started coming out, and because of that, I started playing and pushing in terms of, let's see what the lens can really do. So another example would be the weaver itself hanging on the nest. And it wasn't intended that we'd shoot these for this application, but it was more a case of, let me just shoot some stuff to get some content. And once again, it's absolutely phenomenal. And okay, this bird's a little bit closer, and this is probably more like 7 meters away. But the detail, and these are JPEGs, they're not your high-res RAW files. So even at ISO 1600, if you look at the details in the corner, we're looking at nice soft black backgrounds. The images are very clean for this time of day. And the detail available in the shots is phenomenal. There's, between the highlights, the shadow, the dynamic range of obviously the camera, that plays a key part. But the actual detail in the shot is phenomenal. And this is aside from obviously the actual application of the lens in terms of, if you think about where it fits into the market, the nearest competitor from us is a 7D Mark II with an EF 100 to 400 Mark II lens on it. And that combination of camera with a crop sensor gets you to about 640mm focal length. And if you compare price, if you were able to buy a new 7D today and put that same lens combiner, and you compare that in price of what you would pay for even an entry-level RP or an R itself with 30 megapixels with this lens, you're looking at quite a fairly versatile price point in terms of where the lens is going to fit into the market. And it puts you back at that 600mm point in terms of focal range. So it's in terms of, I believe, the sharpness and the functionality of the lens is there. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit difficult to operate in your early morning shoots, in your late afternoon when the lighting's low, because of the f11. But with modern sensors, modern processors and cameras, that ISO issue seems to be falling away quite rapidly. And in terms of where the lens is intended for the market, if you're a budding wildlife photographer and you don't want to spend big money on a prime lens, this sort of ticks that box quite nicely. Obviously, the bonus is the weight, the size. The functionality is very simple. It's got a great stabilizer built in. It offers you all the basics of what you'd need. And I mean, not everybody is in the market for that type of lens, but it certainly ticks the boxes for a lot of guys that want to get into the market and get into a long focal length lens. And obviously, with the way things are in terms of the market, people are restricted in terms of what they can do in terms of their external activities. And even for the mom and dad who love to photograph their kids at sport, I mean, as an example, we can go. I was fortunate. I've got some friends in the sports photography community, and we get access to some places that not most people do. So during lockdown, there was a practice match for the KZN Dolphins. And if you're looking at the image now where the focus point is on the player, this was just shot as, if you think about distance between me and the player, this is at about a 75 to 80 meter distance. We're sitting in the grandstands at Kings Park or Kingsmead. And in terms of what this little lens is capable of doing in terms of detail over that distance, it's quite phenomenal. I mean, the fact that you can read the Hollywood logos on your shirt, the East Coast, I mean, at that distance, at 60 to 75 meters, that's pretty damn sharp. Yeah. So it's obviously background, the area behind the player and the area in front of the player, we just go back to full shot again. There is a little bit more depth of field in front than there is behind. It is apparent. We try to shoot the shots a little bit elevated so we wouldn't have issues with background. But it's not that sharp in the background. It is apparent, but the actual area where the guy is standing is fairly sharp. And in terms of the main key thing for me was how much detail you're actually getting. And another example of that would be, let's close that image.
But I think what you touched on now is also ideal. If parents are looking at their kids and their school sport,
Yeah,
they're usually not standing next to the field. They're
they're
usually
sitting in
out,
grandstands. Yeah.
and that's a perfect reach that you need to get onto the field where they're busy playing.
Look, I could spoil the waters a bit today if I showed you some of the shots from the 800 because that's even tighter, even closer. But the things that no, we were myself and this guy, a friend of mine, Anesh. We played for 2 hours playing. We swapped the lenses between the R5 and the R, and we were playing backwards and forwards. But we kept looking at each other, going, "Well, this shouldn't be what it is." And the phenomenal thing about it is when you start looking at the shots on the screen. I mean, they're not even printed, but there's a prime example. The focus is on the player. The background is fairly apparent at this angle, but if we just click into 100% zoom, the amount of detail in that shot, and you've just got to bear in mind that in terms of where the price and where this lens sits in terms of price, to get that resolution at that distance is phenomenal.
That is pretty incredible.
So the guys that are going to wildlife parks, to bird reserves on the weekends, not having to buy a prime 500 f4 or a big zoom that goes from 150 to 500 or 600, at this price point, this thing is phenomenal. It ticks every box. I mean, to get that quality at that distance, it's a large subject, sure, but that amount of detail at that distance is phenomenal. And yeah, it's as an all-rounder, I think it's probably gonna impress more people. The little bit of the mindset that you got to get over is that when you hear the words F11, if you're a serious advanced photographer or enthusiastic photographer, you would normally go, oh, F11, I can't use that, it's too much depth of field. But I've spoken since getting the lenses and having to deal with a lot of guys in the birding community, a lot of them have told me, well, we don't normally shoot our big primes wide open at f2.8 or f4. They do shoot at f8 and they do shoot at f11 because they need depth of field or more clarity on the bird, depending on the size of the bird. And I mean, and if you look on the net, there's tons of reviews at the moment. We lent some gear to a guy called Blessing. He works for the KZN Nature Department. He's quite an avid bird photographer. He had never touched a Canon before in his life. He'd been using the other brand for quite a long time. And he used the camera for 2 weeks, came back, and he's written a review for BirdLife SA. And he came back to me and he said, yeah, with the autofocus technology in the cameras and that combination of lens, he says it makes photography for the birding guy that easy. I mean, the camera will spot the bird in the bush before you actually see it because the way the focus works. But as an all-rounder, I've never come across a piece of technology, and Roger and I keep having these calls and video chats about these things on a regular basis. And it's phenomenal that for that, and I keep going on about it, but the price point and the sharpness that you get, the clarity that you get out of that cost of lens is phenomenal. And yeah, we're blown away by it. We think it's got a great future, and I don't think there's going to be, this is like the end of the road for the F11 series. I think there's quite a future. I think there's going to be quite a few more primes in that entry-level price point that make it more appealing for an entry-level photographer to get into that type of photography, be it wildlife, be it birds, be it the avid sporting photographer on weekends who can't afford a 500 f4. Sure, if you can get into a stadium and get a decent position with decent lighting, you are going to produce some really phenomenal results.
Yeah. I think that's exactly it. This lens isn't going to replace your 600 f4.
No.
But 600 f4 comes with its own price tag.
Yeah.
And that's where this is such a beautiful product. It's nice, it's small, easy, compact to carry around.
Sure.
And it's a easier fix to get to that focal length, and the image quality out of it is quite phenomenal.
Yeah, well, image quality wise, it's obviously camera dependent. So whether you shoot it on a 20 million pixel R6, a 30 million pixel R, or a 45 million pixel R5, there's a lot of detail in there, and it produces the goods. It really does. But this could be the lens that gets guys into different genres of photography. The guy doesn't have the budget, but he might step in and say, right, I'm ready to spend 15, 16,000 Rand or 14 grand on a lens. He gets himself one of these 600s, he goes out and he starts producing some really good images of birds, a bit of wildlife, maybe shoot some sport, and he gets out into nature. And after a while, he discovers that this is actually his sort of thing, and it could lead to bigger and better things later on. So yeah, it's a great stepping stone lens for a lot of guys to get into the market with.
Yeah. Justin, thank you so much for your time this morning. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, cool.
And we're quite excited to share the news around this 600mm. Guys, you're more than welcome to come out to Outdoor Photo. Come and chat to the guys in the shop. If you're interested in one of these lenses, let them help you out. Let them get you testing it out outside of the shop, and have a look at the amazing image quality that you can achieve with a lens like this.
Yeah.
Between the 600mm and the 800mm, I think both of them have their places and uses. But quite amazing technology, and I'm quite excited to hear that there are more things coming out from Canon around the RF mounts and these fixed primes.
Yeah, there's
Justin, thank you so much.
Pleasure, good. So thank you for giving me the time. Take care.
Yeah. Enjoy that. Bye bye.
Bye.